Hi everyone. In this week's readings, we're going to be dealing with a very well-known ethical theory alongside Aristotle's virtue ethics and John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, which we're going to be reading next week. The other one of the most consequential, maybe that's unfortunate, maybe one of the most influential and important philosophers in the history of philosophy is Immanuel Kant. And in particular, he's known for his ethical theory known as deontology, or duty-based ethics, which is to say an ethics that is based upon um, the obligations that we have as human beings. What we might say is doing the right thing. We often use that expression is that people just know what the right thing to do is. And even if they're not aware of it, that kind of thinking about doing the right thing is in line with Kant's thinking about ethics. Um, so again, the book we're going to be reading this week is Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. Hopefully you were able to get a hold of that book either in an e-form or the hard copy. And let me just say, so I've given you just a bit about what Kant's ethical theory is. Let me, before getting to the specifics of today's reading, let me just say a bit more about kind of where we're at in the course as we transitioned from Aristotle to Kant. Remember that the way that I've organized the course is around three normative theories. And normative ethics is trying to figure out whether there is a standard that can be applied consistently to human actions and choices to tell us what the right choice is, what the best choice is for human action and choice. And often in normative ethics, we're going to ask, where is it that we are locating the normativity, so to speak? In other words, what kinds of questions are we asking in order to discover what the standard is going to be for our ethical theory? For Aristotle, the normativity of his ethical theory was located in asking about human nature, which is to say, asking about what we are like naturally. Is there anything about what human beings are like naturally that will give us a clue about what kind of standards we should use to evaluate their choices and actions? And for Aristotle, it is about asking about human nature. And for Aristotle, Aristotle offers what is referred to as a teleological account of human nature, which is to say, an account that asks about the purpose or the ultimate purpose of something or someone. And the ultimate purpose of a human being, their function, in other words, is to live virtuously in accordance with reason. And so, and Aristotle, so the ultimate source of normativity for Aristotle is asking about human nature, and human nature, what's true about human nature for Aristotle is that we all desire happiness. We all want this thing called happiness as the highest good. And so, in order to achieve the highest good, we have to exercise our reason appropriately, which means virtuously. And so there's something in human nature itself as such, not a particular human nature, not, mine or your human nature, but human nature as such that will give us the standard of how we should evaluate human actions. Now, Kant has a completely different starting point for thinking about where we're going to locate the normativity of human actions. And for Kant, we cannot begin with human nature in the way that Aristotle did. because for Kant, there is no fixed human nature. There is no teleological account that can be provided of what human nature is like. Um, and so this really gets into one of the fundamental distinctions between Kant and Aristotle. Aristotle is more focused on, in ethics, on what we might call figuring out what the good thing to do is, which is to say that thing which makes us happy. And so ethics is inherently tied up with asking about what the good choice is or the good action is. Whereas for Kant, there is a distinction to be made between what the right thing to do is and the good thing to do. And the right thing to do may not be the same as what the good thing to do is. And so Kant is more focused on right action as opposed to good action. And so that is an important fundamental distinction within ethics, whereas Kant is more focused on the right thing to do as opposed to the good thing, which means that Kant's focus on in ethics has nothing to do with actions that are going to make us happy. Doing the right thing may or may not result in us becoming happy, but that is beside the point for Kant. Moral evaluation begins and ends with our motivations and our intentions, the reasons that we perform and choose certain actions, regardless of the consequences or regardless of whether or not we become happy as a result. And so that is a fundamental distinction. Kant's starting point is fundamentally different than Aristotle's. And so that gets into a really that is a good kind of starting point to think about where Kant starts and to think about where Aristotle starts and understand why their normative theories are different. Now, you had about 10 pages to read for today out of Kant, pages 9 to 17 from the first part. With Kant, what you're going to discover quickly is that the jargon is it's very jargon heavy, jargon laden. There is a lot of technical vocabulary in Kant. It's not necessarily important that you know the meaning of every single jargony word that Kant uses. Hopefully with this video, the lecture notes, and the other link I provided you on the syllabus, I hope that you can have a sense of what Kant's ethical theory is about without necessarily understanding everything that he says or writes. And indeed, you won't. I read it to this day and still don't, because Kant is very difficult. But it's important to read Kant because Kant, whether or not you realize it, you are thinking in Kantian terms all the time, like I said at the beginning. And so that's important to realize, is that even though you may think, what is with all this vocabulary, Kant's ethical theory is extremely influential and extremely important because we think in Kantian terms every day and all the time without realizing it. So, with that said, I'm going to go into the reading a little bit. So, Kant begins his ethical theory by talking about a concept known as the good will. Why does Kant begin with the good will? Well, for Kant, Kant argues that the good will is the only thing that is good without qualification, that there is nothing else we can say in the universe that exists that is good without qualification. Now, what does that amount to? Well, it's similar to what Aristotle said about the highest good, is that it is good on its own. It doesn't require anything else, that when you have a good will, you don't need anything else to make you good. When you have a good will, you are considered good. You don't need anything else in addition to it. And in fact, Kant says that a good will is the condition for anything else being good. Now, why does he say that? Well, he talks on page 9 about, so if you're looking at the text here, I have the book in front of me. On page 9, Kant is talking about character and talents and, things that human beings have. We have certain talents. But on their own, those talents are neither good nor bad, because the talents, of course, we could be used for bad purposes. Imagine that we have intelligence. We are very clever, and lots of human beings are very clever and intelligent. And we hope that our cleverness and our intelligence would be used for doing good things. But of course, you could be clever and become a mass murderer. You could use your cleverness for those reasons. And so if you don't have a good will behind the talents that you possess, then they won't be considered good. You need to be able to do good things, and you also need to have good reasons for doing those things. So, in essence, a good will for Kant is someone who can do the right things, but do them for the right reasons. And everything in Kant hinges around our reasons. The actions we perform embody the reasons that we perform those actions. Our actions tell others about the reasons that we've chosen to perform or make the choices that we've made. So, um, doing the right thing for the right reason. That is a crucial distinction in Kant. Um, Now, once Kant, Kant has a little bit of a crucial line on page 10. If you're looking at 10, Kant says a good will is good not because of what it affects or accomplishes, not because of its fitness to attain some intended end, but good just by its willing in itself. So the point is, often an example I give, and I have in the notes about a firefighter, why is a goodwill good on its own, and why does it not depend on what it accomplishes? Well, imagine a firefighter who rushes into a burning building to save, people that are trapped in there, and they are scared and terrified. The time is of the essence, and the firefighter gets in there, and unfortunately, by the time he comes out, he has not saved the lives of the children in the fire. He was not successful in his attempts to save them. Now, what would we say about the firefighter if we had to evaluate the firefighter? Would we say that the firefighter is a bad person because they have failed? Well, no. We would say that they had good intentions. They had good reasons to do what they did. They just were not successful. So we don't call somebody a bad person because they did not save the children. If we discover that they only wanted to save the children because they were hoping to appear on the nightly news and look like a hero, then we might. But assuming that this is a firefighter, an altruistic firefighter who has rushed in to save simply because he felt a sense of duty and obligation to do so, and he fails, he still had good willing. He made the right choice. Willing is choosing. He chose to help because he felt a sense of duty and obligation to help, regardless of whether he was successful. And for Kant, we would morally praise the firefighter even if he wasn't successful. So I think that example is that should help to explain what Kant is saying there on page 10 when he says it's good just because of its willing, good in itself, not good as a means to some further end. Because in this case, if we were evaluating it according to the end, we might regard the firefighter as somehow a bad person, but good in itself because of its willing or its choosing, right? So um, I want to see from there. There's more going on in this first part, and there's some things in the note. There's a discussion of reason and instinct. Um, and I'm gonna skip that for the purposes of this video, but there are some things in the notes about reason and instinct that you'll want to look at. That occurs from the bottom of page 10 up to the top of page 12. But what I want to do is look next to this concept that Kant calls duty. Uh, um, but I want to just pause for a moment because you may think, well, Kant's giving us this fancy jargon. He's calling this thing a good will. But really, what is a good will? We don't really talk about that, but we do talk about there being good people. Maybe you say my dad is a good person, or my mom is a good person, or my friend is a good person, or I am a good person. Maybe I hope you all consider yourselves good people. And the question is, what do we mean by that? And I think what Kant's getting at when he talks about a goodwill is similar to or akin to what we mean when we say that somebody is a good person. They're somebody who does good things. Indeed, they are consistently doing things that we admire and that we would want to emulate with our own behavior. They serve as role models for us. You all have people like that in your lives. But I guess I want you to think about why we would admire those people. Is it just that they do good things? Did they just kind of get lucky? Did they just kind of stumble around every day and they do the right things, but they get lucky in doing them and it's just kind of an accident? Well, no. Presumably, the people that do good things know why they are doing good things. They can give you the reasons that they have chosen to perform the actions that they've performed. And so there's something about choosing good actions or performing good actions and having good reasons for those actions that is significant because that means that we are self-consciously choosing to be good people based upon the reasons. You don't just get lucky to be a good person. Similar to how Aristotle talked about how choosing to be you have to choose to be virtuous. You don't just get lucky. Now there may be there may be some luck involved, but ultimately we want to be able to assume that somebody who's a good person has has voluntarily chosen to be that way and that there's something about a voluntarily choosing to be that way that we admire. Otherwise, I don't think we would admire these people as much if they just happen to get lucky and do the right thing, as opposed to intentionally living their lives in ways that we admire. And so that's important. So a good person and a good will, I think, are important. Now, I said that Kant's more about doing the right thing as opposed to the good thing. The good and the right, in some ways, good in this sense doesn't mean good consequences. Good here doesn't refer to happiness. Good here refers to good is describing our will, our capacity for choosing. So good is descriptive of our will. Good is not necessarily descriptive of the state that we are in when we perform the action. So goodness is descriptive of our choosing. We had a good reason, right? So goodness is embodied in the reasons we perform the actions. Goodness is not embodied in the state we achieve because of our actions. So even though I said good, you may have been confused. Why do I keep talking about good? Well, that's the distinction. Okay, now I want to get to this concept of duty. Kant's ethics is often referred to as a duty-based ethics. Now, when Kant gets to the bottom of page 12 here, he introduces this quote. He says, in order then to unravel the concept of a will to be highly esteemed in itself and good apart from any further purpose, this concept that always comes first in estimating the entire worth of our actions and constitutes the condition of everything else, we shall inspect the concept of duty, which contains that of a good will. So, goodwill and duty go together. That's what Kant is saying. And he says that the concept of duty contains the concept of the goodwill, which is to say, by examining the meaning of this thing that Kant is calling duty, it's going to tell us something more about what it means to act with a good will. So, first of all, duty has some connotations for us that we associate often with the military. That somehow doing your duty is something somehow about going above and beyond what you're expected to do. In terms of service to our country, it's the ultimate sacrifice to go out and perform your duty, your civic duty. For Kant, duty has none of those connotations. Duty has simply the connotation of doing what is expected of you morally. So it has no sense of going above and beyond. Everyone should perform their duties. Everyone ought to do good things. Everyone ought to do the right thing. So duty has no superfluous, extraordinary sense here. It's just what everybody ought to do. If you see somebody who's in need of help, then you help them. And if you did it because you felt an obligation to help them, then you would be doing your duty. Okay? So that's all it means. So duty is simply the name that Kant gives to what we would call a moral motivation. To be motivated morally is to be motivated by a sense of duty to do the right thing. That's what, so duty is the special name that Kant gives to moral motivation. There are lots of ways to be motivated. There are immoral motivations, of course, that you are motivated by a sense of revenge. Well, that would be potentially an immoral motivation. There's also just non-moral, which has nothing to do with morality. For example, when I wake up in the morning and I choose to have cereal instead of fruit for breakfast, that is that has nothing to do with morality. That is a non-moral choice. So not all choices are moral choices. But if it is a moral choice, then for Kant, the moral choice must be characterized by doing it out of a sense of duty or obligation. That is a synonym that you can easily use. So, so what's the connection between goodwill and duty? Well, somebody who has a goodwill does the right thing for the right reason. And the right reason in this case is duty. So the class of reasons that Kant will call moral reasons to do the right thing are called duty. So doing the right thing for the right reason is to have a good will, and that right reason that it means to have a good will just is doing something out of duty or obligation. So there's the connection. Now, um, on pages 13 to 17, well, there are several examples now that Kant is going to give to try to show you that there is this sense of moral motivation called duty that um, all of us think is true. That there is this special thing Kant is calling duty that is separate from other reasons for acting. But Kant doesn't want to just kind of I mean, Kant thinks we all agree that it exists, but he wants to elucidate that it exists by giving some examples that show that. So, in the notes, if you look at the notes for today, these examples begin again on page 13, where he's saying, I here pass over actions already recognized as contrary to duty. So Kant's first example there is going to be of a shopkeeper or somebody who owns a store. And so if you look at the notes, starting on page 3 of the notes, I've given you different. Kant gives several different examples of uh, reasons for choosing to perform certain actions and trying to figure out whether certain kinds of reasons could count as moral. Now, we already know that Kant is going to say that it's only actions performed from duty that have moral worth, that can be called worthy of being considered moral, in other words. But Kant wants to say, but we have all these other people have other reasons for doing things all the time. So why aren't those considered moral? So the first example he gives is of somebody who owns a store. And the person who owns the store is deciding not to overcharge their customers. Um, the person who owns the store knows that it's possible that he could, if he wanted to, he could raise his prices because he knows that all these people who are coming into his store know nothing about what I don't know. I mean, the easiest example is a used car salesman, and people, these suckers who come onto the lot and they have no idea what a car is supposed to cost, and so they overcharge them. Now, obviously, that would be the wrong thing to do. The question is, why does the person who owns the business decide not to overcharge the customers? Well, the reason we could say it could we assume, simply based upon inspection, that the person who owns the business is a good person simply because he doesn't overcharge his customers? Well, one of our responses might be, well, we hope that he's doing it out of a sense of obligation to do the right thing, but chances are he knows that if he overcharges his customers, he's going to get a bad reputation. People are going to spread the word that this guy's, not a good business person, and so he's not going to get return business. And so there is some selfish, self-interested reasons here that the business owner has for not overcharging customers. And so that example is not going to be an example of doing something out of duty or obligation, because it's impossible to dissociate the self-interested reason that the business owner has from the moral obligation that he has not to. And so so again, we hope that he wants to overcharge his customers for the right reason, but we can't assume that that's the case. Um, Now, what would count as a moral reason to do it? Well, he would have to be doing it out of an obligation to his customers, simply because it is a moral obligation that exists independent of the shop owner, independent of the consequences to his business for doing the right thing. It doesn't matter if his business benefits as a result of not overcharging his customers. It exists as a moral obligation for any human being to be honest with another human being. And that is the case here, is that the shop owner should not overcharge the customers because it is the right thing to do, regardless of the consequences. It has nothing to do with this particular shop owner. Any business owner anywhere should not overcharge customers because being honest is the right thing to do, regardless of the specific circumstances. Um, Now, there are a few other examples. The one other example that I'm going to give, and this one is often a little confusing to students, but Kant talks about helping others. So you see someone else in need. I don't know, you see somebody on the side of the road, or you see a fellow human being who needs help. Um, and there's no one else around to help. You're the only one that can help. And the question is, what should you do? Well, you should help. Of course, you should reach out to them in their time of need and do whatever you can to help. But the question is, why do you help? What reason do you have for helping? Well, I don't know, maybe you help because you want to. Because wanting you want to help, helping makes you feel good, um, and helping makes the other person feel good, and therefore that's why you help, because you want to, and that's it. You say to yourself, I want to help because it makes me feel good, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? And in the notes here, though I have some distinctions between helping others and choosing to do so only because you want to versus helping others because it is required of you. And the question is, what is your reason? Why do you choose to help? Right? And Kant makes a distinction here between the naturally sympathetic person, that is the person who wants to help, the naturally sympathetic person, and the person who helps because it is their obligation to do so. That is